Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today's mystery follows the world of Hercule Poirot, but this isn't a novel. This is a story rooted in truth, retold in his signature style. So sit back, listen closely, and let the shadows speak. Chapter 1. Rain at the Beau Séjour. The rain fell in long, elegant strands against the tall, arched windows of the Hotel Beau Séjour, a grand, fading jewel nestled deep within the secluded valleys of the French countryside. Time did not pass. At the Beau Séjour, it settled. Every inch of the place held onto the weight of its past. The velvet drapes heavy with dust and perfume, the ornate crown moldings gilded with hand-laid gold leaf from a forgotten era, and the creaking parquet. Floors that whispered with every careful step. It was a hotel known not for its size or glamour, but for its discretion, a place where aristocrats, writers, widows, and those burdened with unspoken grief came to disappear from the world or from themselves. The guests rarely spoke beyond what was necessary, and the staff, trained to perfection, spoke even less. Luggage arrived and vanished like secrets. Names were recorded in perfect penmanship, but never spoken aloud in the corridors. There were no parties, no music beyond the soft clink of glass in the drawing room or the echo of a solitary violinist hired to play only during dinner service. Even the laughter that occasionally drifted from behind closed doors seemed hollow, decorative, like porcelain. That Sunday night, the hotel had been at half capacity, but the silence made it feel full. The dining hall had seen no more than 12 guests that evening, scattered across small, circular tables with linen cloths and candlelight, their silverware making quiet music beneath a crystal chandelier. The menu had been typical: poached fish, roasted vegetables, a tart fine aux pommes, but it had been received with mild nods and pleasant murmurs, then forgotten. Outside, the rain deepened. It tapped gently against the high panes, then more urgently, like fingernails against glass. The fire in the drawing room was low and warm, and the atmosphere lulled most guests into an easy melancholy. It was the kind of night designed for sleep, for forgetting, for letting go. But somewhere, just past midnight, a scream tore through the stillness. One sharp, full-bodied scream from the second floor. A woman's voice, raw and real and terrified. Then, silence. It came from room 6. The response was slow at first, guests opening doors in their dressing gowns, blinking into the hall like owls startled from roost. Some clutched robes around themselves. Others peeked through chained doors. No one moved. Quickly, but they all felt the same shiver, a shift in the air, like when a curtain is pulled back on something that was meant to stay hidden. Room 6 was at the end of the east corridor, one of the premium suites, always reserved, rarely vacant. No one knew who had checked in that week, just a name on a card at the reception desk: Madame Celeste Moreau. A widow, they had heard. Quiet, refined, wealthy. She had arrived alone. Monsieur Lefebvre, the manager, arrived at the door with a porter behind him, clutching the master key. The door was locked from the inside. No answer came. No footsteps. No voice. Just the heavy, unnatural silence that fills a space when something once alive has just stopped breathing. The porter's hands shook as he handed the key to Lefebvre. With a grim glance toward the gathering onlookers, the manager unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly. What greeted them was a room untouched by chaos, eerily perfect. The curtains were drawn. A fire smoldered gently in the hearth. The air smelled faintly of lavender oil and wood smoke. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no overturned chairs. Just a woman. Celeste Moreau lay on the velvet divan, dressed in a dark sapphire evening gown, her arms folded neatly over her abdomen. Her eyes were open, glassy, fixed on the ceiling like she'd been caught mid-thought. Her mouth was slightly parted. A half-full glass of wine rested on the side table beside her, untouched. Nothing else seemed out of place. Nothing except her. The guests who had followed Lefebvre recoiled instinctively. One woman gasped. A man covered his mouth. The porter stepped backward and crossed himself. The young hotel nurse, called immediately from her quarters downstairs, arrived breathless, her night dress barely covered by her raincoat. She approached, knelt, checked for pulse, for warmth, for any hint of breath. Then, with a quiet nod, she confirmed what no one wanted to say. Madame Moreau was dead. The police were summoned immediately. Within the hour, the suite had been cleared, the door locked once more, this time with a different kind of tension behind it. Guests were ushered back to their rooms. Questions floated down the hall in hushed voices. Had she been ill? Was it a suicide? Why was the door locked? Why had she screamed? No one had answers. The staff whispered in the kitchen about the glass of wine, about the calm expression on her face, about the stillness that felt too still. The chambermaid assigned to her room mentioned how quiet the woman had been all week. She always left her room perfectly neat, always folded her bed covers as though afraid of disturbing the linens. She had taken her meals in the dining hall, always alone, always with her gloves on. She rarely smiled. She never drank. And that night, she had requested extra blankets, saying the wind chilled her bones. But the windows had been closed, the fire lit, and still, she asked for warmth. That was the last anyone had seen of her. When the police arrived, they found no sign of forced entry, no wounds, no medications or letters, no indication that Celeste had expected to die. The bottle of wine was tested, no poison. Her fingerprints were on the glass. No one else's. The door was still locked from the inside. The windows sealed shut. The balcony untouched. Her death was ruled undetermined. Though the gendarmes whispered among themselves about the odd clock on the mantel, about the way her hands were folded, about the lipstick on the glass, though the victim wore none. By morning, the rain had lightened, but the mood within the Beau Séjour remained heavy. Some guests left early, citing appointments and train schedules. Others stayed, half hoping to overhear something. Monsieur Lefebvre stood behind the reception desk with a telegram, form in his hand, writing with deliberate care. His script was small, neat, precise. Discreet matter. Room 6. Possible murder. Send Hercule Poirot immediately. He signed the hotel's name and slipped the message into the dispatch pile without a word. 2 days later, in a quiet apartment in Paris, a man with patent leather shoes and a famously meticulous mustache read the telegram while sipping his morning tisane. Hercule Poirot adjusted his cuffs, examined the weather from his window, and folded the telegram with a soft smile. Murder, he whispered to himself, always believes itself clever, but it always leaves a trace. Chapter 2. The locked door and the uninvited guest the following morning arrived cloaked in a silvery fog that hung low over the lake like a curtain drawn across a stage, hiding everything but hinting at something just behind, something watching. The grounds of the Hotel Beau Séjour, normally kept pristine by an unseen army of gardeners and housekeepers, felt strangely hushed, almost reverent, as though nature itself had paused to listen. It was in this moody veil of mourning that Hercule Poirot stepped from the long black motor car that had delivered him from the Paris train station. He descended with the grace and purpose of a man accustomed to being summoned only when mystery outweighed answers, when order had been disturbed, and when quiet deaths whispered louder than screams. He wore a light gray suit, perfectly pressed, with a matching bowler hat perched precisely above his fastidious mustache, and the glint of his polished shoes never dulled as he strode across the cobbled path. The rain had left fine droplets clinging to the wrought iron awning above the front doors, and Poirot paused a moment under it, not to avoid getting wet, but to observe. He stared up at the building, stone walls worn with time, ivy crawling like veins across its facade, and windows like eyes too proud to blink. Then he entered. Monsieur Lefebvre greeted him personally, having waited at the desk since dawn. Monsieur Poirot, he said softly and bowed his head, as if one bowed to a doctor just before receiving tragic news. We have prepared everything you requested. Without a wasted motion, Poirot was handed a folder, the room key, the coroner's early summary, and a short, apologetic note from the local police chief expressing the unfortunate lack of evidence. Poirot nodded once, glanced briefly at the paper, and tucked it into his coat. "Take me to the room," he said. His voice was quiet, but final. Room 6 had been sealed since the night of Celeste Moreau's death, its door marked discreetly with a pale ribbon and a single brass sign. Prive, maintenance. The corridor leading to it was empty, silent, and faintly smelled of old wood and lemon oil. Poirot paused just outside the door, closed his eyes, and took a long breath. When he opened them, he was no longer merely a guest. He was a hunter, and the room, a cage of hidden truths. Inside, nothing had changed. The fire in the hearth had long gone cold, but the scent of ash and lavender lingered. The curtains remained drawn. The wine glass still stood where it had, half full, untouched. Poirot approached the divan where Celeste had been found. Its deep emerald upholstery bore only the faintest memory of her shape. The scene was so intact, so frozen, it might have been staged. He crouched beside the side table. The wine glass was elegant, stemmed, crystal, with a faint smudge of lipstick at the rim. Burgundy, subtle, the kind of color only worn by women confident in their silence. Poirot sniffed the contents. No bitter trace, no scent of almonds or citrus, but something else lingered, an echo of emotion. He could feel it, not fear, resignation. Poirot stood and paced the room slowly, his eyes touching every corner, every object. Nothing had been disturbed, and yet everything was wrong. He approached the fireplace and examined the antique mantel clock. A brass piece, delicate, with an engraved floral design and Roman numerals. The hands were set to 11:55. Poirot pulled his own watch from his pocket, 12 o'clock exactly. A 5-minute discrepancy. He removed the glass casing from the clock and touched the hands lightly. The minute hand wobbled slightly, not broken, but loosened. A deliberate manipulation, perhaps. He turned toward the balcony doors. The bolt was in place, but Poirot noted that the wood beneath the latch was faintly scratched. Not fresh, but not aged either. A pry mark? Someone had tampered with the door, perhaps opened it without unlocking it. He looked out. The balcony overlooked a private garden and the narrow footpath to the stables. A determined person could scale it. Poirot knelt beside the doorframe, running his fingers along the sill. Dust, but disturbed. He stood and stared for a long while. The windows had not been opened, yet someone had passed through them. He could feel it. On the writing desk, he found hotel stationery. Most pages were blank, but one bore a faint indent, the shadow of a letter once written and discarded. Poirot pulled a soft pencil from his pocket and began to shade lightly over the sheet. Slowly, words emerged. "You said it would end. It hasn't. I won't stay quiet." No signature. The writing was slanted, quick, precise, and clearly distressed. A letter written in haste, likely in fear, then torn and removed. But for who? Poirot's eyes shifted toward the bedroom. There, he found Celeste's luggage, unopened, meticulously packed. Nothing was out of place, not even her gloves. He returned to the registry. Guest logs from the week of Celeste's stay revealed names of little interest, except two: Monsieur Henri Duret and Madame Elise Varenne. Duret had checked in the same evening as Celeste. A businessman from Lyon, claimed to be here for leisure. Room 11. Varenne, room 4, registered as a widow, quiet, elegant, often seen with a book. Both still present. Poirot requested interviews, starting with Duret. He was tall, well-dressed, with thinning hair and a persistent twitch in his fingers. He claimed no acquaintance with Celeste, said he'd seen her once at breakfast but had never spoken. When asked about the evening in question, he claimed to have spent it in the drawing room, reading until 11 p.m., then retiring. Poirot asked what book. A travelogue on Patagonia, Duret said. When Poirot later inspected Duret's room, no such book existed. Instead, a copy of Le Crime de l'Opera sat on the nightstand, spine creased. Duret had lied. Why? To conceal an innocent error or something more. Then came Madame Varenne, mid-40s, tall, composed, with hair swept into a chignon, and fingers adorned with thin gold rings. Her presence was disarming, like the scent of a foreign flower, exotic, strange, hard to place. She admitted to knowing who Celeste was, even nodded once as if recalling her face. We spoke once, she said, in the garden. She admired my shawl. We did not exchange names. When asked about her evening, she said she had retired early due to a migraine, had not left her room. Poirot inquired gently, "Lipstick, Madame, we're the same shade." She smiled, then said, "Many women do, monsieur. Burgundy is quite popular this season." He nodded, then asked, "Did you drink wine that night?" Her eyes narrowed, then softened. "I always do," she said. "A glass before bed. It helps silence the noise." Poirot returned to room 6. He crouched near the fireplace again and stared at the clock. 5 minutes slow. Why? To confuse the time of death? The police had arrived at 12:08. The body had been discovered at 12:01. But if the clock had said 11:55, then the window of escape widened. Poirot looked toward the balcony. It was not impossible. The soil beneath showed faint disturbance. No footprints, but the impression of something having landed. A man could have climbed it, could have left, and yet the room had remained locked. Then there was the matter of the letter, the lipstick, the false alibis. Poirot gathered his thoughts. In silence, over the next hour, he interviewed the chambermaid again. The girl admitted to something she hadn't told the police. Just before she reached Celeste's door to deliver blankets, she saw someone walk briskly down the corridor from that direction. She didn't see the face, but noted a brown scarf, polished shoes, and a scent of expensive aftershave. Poirot nodded. Henri Duret wore the same cologne. In his inspection of Duret's room, Poirot had also found a torn envelope, wax seal half broken, tucked beneath a drawer, matching the scrap, left in Celeste's writing desk. Coincidence? He thought not. Poirot retreated to the library that evening with tea, silence, and a fire crackling behind him. He let his thoughts unwind. Duret had lied about his reading. Varenne had worn the same lipstick that marked the wine glass. Celeste had written a letter she never sent. The clock was wrong. The door was locked. But someone had entered that room. He was certain, not with noise, but with intent. The question was no longer how, but why. What had Celeste threatened to reveal? And who had the most to lose? Poirot closed his eyes and whispered aloud. There was a guest that night, uninvited. And I believe they never truly left. Chapter 3. The secret between the rooms. By the time the third day dawned over the Hotel Beau Séjour, a cold gray mist had curled its way through the manicured hedges and along the stone balustrades like a hand that refused to let go. There was no sun, just a bleached, diffused light that barely pierced the long windows of the drawing room, turning crystal chandeliers into dull glass and gold trim into quiet brass. But inside, the guests no longer wandered through the halls with books or polite smiles. The incident, no longer referred to as an incident, but simply as her, had changed the entire rhythm of the hotel. It was now a place that breathed uneasily, where laughter was no longer heard at dinner, where eyes lingered longer than they should across linen-covered tables, and where the fire crackled in the lounge not as comfort, but as warning. People had stopped speaking in full sentences. Speculation had replaced curiosity. Suspicion hung in the wallpaper. And in the center of this quiet storm walked Hercule Poirot, calm and razor-sharp, his presence slicing cleanly through the thickening atmosphere like a scalpel drawn across old skin. He asked fewer questions now, but listened more. He watched the way Durit avoided eye contact in the mornings, the way Elise Varenne lit her cigarette with trembling fingers near the stairwell at exactly 10 minutes past 10 each night, as if keeping vigil for something or someone that no longer kept time. He watched the staff too. The chambermaid who refused to enter the east wing alone after dusk. The bellboy who claimed he heard footsteps in room 7 despite it being unoccupied for days. The kitchen boy who had once delivered warm milk to room 6 and said the widow never blinked. Poirot had long believed that the truth, like perfume, never entirely vanishes. It lingers where it was most unwelcome. And so, that morning, he requested access to room 7, the suite adjacent to the one where Madame Moreau had been found dead. The staff hesitated, not because they feared Poirot, but because they feared what he might find. The manager's key turned reluctantly in the lock, and the door opened into a room so perfectly arranged it might have been staged by time itself. Bed made so tightly it dared not wrinkle, towels folded into neat squares like pressed leaves, and curtains tied back to let in a gray light that did little to soften the dark wood furniture or the cold air that clung to the corners. Poirot stood in the center of the room, silent for nearly 3 minutes, letting the walls speak first. Then, with that same slow precision that had unnerved murderers across 3 continents, he moved toward the far wall, the one shared with room 6. There, near the headboard, barely knee-high, was a ventilation grate. Old, brass, dusty. Poirot crouched, slipped a glove from his coat pocket, and removed the screws delicately with a tool so small it seemed part of a watchmaker's kit. As the final screw fell into his palm, the grate loosened and revealed a dark shaft. And there, tucked within the layer of dust and lint and silence, was a small object, a brooch. Oval, gold-plated, with a crack down its center like a healed scar. Poirot lifted it carefully, examined it beneath the faint window light. The initials engraved on the back, C. M. Whispered all he needed to know. It was Celeste Moreau's. This had not fallen here by accident, nor was it deliberately placed. It had been torn, dislodged during movement, during a struggle, during an act of panic. The shaft itself was narrow but passable. A man of slim build, or a determined one, could crawl from room 7 to room 6 if he knew the space. Poirot measured it by eye, then traced the outline of the shaft with his gloved fingers. Dust shifted, but there was no rodent activity, no signs of regular use. It had been undisturbed for a long time. Until recently, he placed the brooch in an envelope and sealed it. There were too many rooms in this hotel where no one heard anything, but everything had been seen. And so he made his next move. Henri Durit, when summoned to room 7, arrived wearing a thin coat and a false smile. He complimented Poirot's waistcoat, commented on the weather, said nothing of the brooch in Poirot's hand. Monsieur Durit, Poirot said quietly, do you smoke? Durit hesitated. Sometimes, he said. A pipe? No cigarettes. Curious, Poirot said, walking toward the window. This room smells faintly of pipe tobacco. Yet no ashtray, no guest, no reservation. A curious ghost in SC Pa? Durit swallowed. Perhaps a previous guest. Poirot turned, slowly. This room has been vacant for 4 days. Durit said nothing. Poirot stepped closer. Your cologne, identical to the one reported by the chambermaid outside room 6. The book you claimed to be reading in the lounge that night does not exist. And this, he lifted the envelope, was found in the wall between this room and the one where Celeste Moreau died. It bears her initials. It sat in dust. You knew her, didn't you? Durit's face collapsed like wet paper. His body slumped into the armchair near the hearth. Yes, he whispered. She was family. Poirot remained silent. My wife's sister. Years ago. But there was more. Before the marriage. Before everything. We were young. We made mistakes. Poirot's expression did not soften. Durrett looked down. I hadn't seen her in years. Then she checked in. I panicked. I thought, what if she still remembered? What if she told someone? He exhaled slowly. I entered the room only once. Through the shaft. I didn't hurt her. I just wanted to see. Make sure she wasn't, he stopped. A threat. Poirot offered. Durrett nodded, ashamed. I took the brooch by mistake. I didn't even realize until I was back in this room. Poirot stared at him for a long moment. If you are lying, you will be found out. If you are not, then the killer walked behind you and did not need a shaft. Durrett wept into his palms. Poirot left him with the weight of silence. That night, he turned his attention to Elise Varenne. She arrived in the lounge just before midnight, robes cinched tight, eyes narrowed like a cat preparing for confrontation. You summoned me again, she said. Poirot nodded, poured tea. You knew Celeste Moreau. Everyone knew her, Elise said. Poirot smiled faintly. You knew her husband. Elise said nothing. Poirot continued. Before the marriage. Before the scandal. Before you changed your name. Elise blinked. Poirot went on. Your real name is Elise Charbonneau. Tried for fraud. Disappeared. Resurfaced here, under a widow's veil. The lies are piling up, madam. Elise's voice was thin. He told me she was ill. That she wanted out. That she agreed to their arrangement. I believed him. Did you? Poirot asked. Or did you simply not care? She flinched. She wrote to me. Elise whispered. Said she knew. Said she wanted to confront me. I came here to stop her. I went to the room. But she was already dead. Poirot studied her. And yet, you altered the clock. Elise looked away. I was afraid. I thought if I made it look like she died later, the suspicion would fall elsewhere. But I didn't kill her. Poirot did not respond. Instead, he retrieved the second envelope, one bearing a wine glass swabbed for lipstick. This matches your shade, he said. Elise smiled sadly. So does every woman here. Poirot let her leave. But that night, he stood alone in room 6 once more. The fire remained out. The bed undisturbed. The divan empty. But the room was loud. He could hear it now. Celeste's final thoughts, her unfinished letter, the whisper of a secret too long buried. Someone had entered this room not to kill, but to silence. And they had succeeded. But Poirot, standing beneath the ancient brass, clock ticking slightly off time, knew one thing with certainty. The killer came through familiarity, not force. And the true question now is not how she died, but what she refused to take with her. Chapter 4. The letter that wasn't burned that morning. As a pale rain slid down the windows of the Hotel Beau Séjour in slow, trembling veins, Hercule Poirot stood alone in the reading room beneath a chandelier that no longer sparkled, leafing. Through the pages of his small leather notebook, his eyes moving like twin blades carving through silence. The storm outside had settled into a persistent drizzle, the kind that wraps a building in gray and makes every room feel smaller, colder, and less certain. The hotel itself had grown quieter by the hour. The halls were no longer filled with the soft laughter of well-dressed guests or the chime of silver spoons against porcelain teacups. Instead, everything had become muffled, conversations truncated, footsteps hesitant, and even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the lobby sounded delayed, like it too had fallen under the spell of room 6. Poirot had known from the start that Madame Celeste Moreau's death was not a simple event, not something that could be explained by a heart grown weary with age or a glass of wine taken too late. No, her death had been timed, carefully, quietly, like the closing of a curtain, during the final act of a play no one admitted to writing. He had examined the wine glass, the lipstick stain, the ventilation shaft, the torn stationery, the misplaced brooch, and the fire's ashes. He had spoken to the liars and the half-truth tellers, to the man who used the shaft like a corridor, between past and present, and to the woman who wore her guilt behind rings and silk. But something still breathed beneath the puzzle, something not yet named. That was when he returned to room 6, not with intention, but instinct, like a detective returning to the scene not to look for evidence, but to listen. The room greeted him with stillness. It had become less a suite and more a shrine, as untouched as the day Celeste had been found slumped across the divan, eyes open, wine full, time frozen. Poirot did not touch the fireplace right away. He stood at its edge, studying the charred wood, the soot line just above the grate, and the faint discoloration of brick where something had been burned too quickly, too recently. Kneeling slowly, he reached inside the flue with a gloved hand, pressing past the cold, dry edges until his fingertips brushed the ghost of something softer. A crumpled corner, delicate, fragile, resisting the touch like it wanted to stay hidden. He pulled it free, the scorched remains of a letter. Half-burned, edges blackened, center still intact. He opened it carefully, laying it against a fresh linen napkin on the table to preserve its shape. The writing was uneven, emotional, penned, with deliberate force and urgency. If you won't confess, then I will. The years don't erase guilt, Alan. You can lie to Elise, to the world, but not to me. This is the last time I ask. It was not signed. But Alan, his name stood like a sword thrust into the heart of the page. Poirot's mind turned, now not as a detective seeking facts, but as a man standing beneath the last pieces of a crumbling ceiling, watching the cracks spread toward the truth. Alan Moreau, the husband, the absent figure whose name no one had dared speak aloud. The man Elise claimed to love. The man Celeste had written to, perhaps threatened, but he had not been listed on the guest registry. He had not been seen at the hotel. And yet, Poirot remembered something. A name on the guest list that had struck him as oddly blank. Jean-Baptiste Leclerc. Room 10. Paid in cash. No passport registered. No luggage handled by Bell staff. Checked out quietly the morning after Celeste died. Too clean. Too silent. Poirot requested the room to be reopened. When he stepped into room 10, he felt it instantly. The absence. The staged sterility. The sheets were too perfectly tucked. The closet too bare. It was the kind of room where someone had stayed but never lived. Still, inside the wardrobe, tucked beneath the lining of a coat pocket left behind by accident or arrogance, he found it. A coat. Fine wool, tailored in lion, with the initials AM sewn in cursive into the inside breast pocket. Poirot exhaled. Once, slowly. Alan had been here, and the name Leclerc had been his disguise. He had watched the hotel in silence. He had passed Elise in the hallway. He had stood in the same dining room as his wife and said nothing. And sometime between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, he had visited room 6. Poirot turned to the hotel's phone registry, managed by the concierge's meticulous hand. One call had been placed from the public telephone in the lobby at 11:41 p.m. the night of Celeste's death. It had lasted 9 minutes. The number? A law firm in Marseille, specializing in estate litigation and criminal counsel. Celeste had called them, or tried to. 9 minutes of trembling conversation that ended when Alan walked through the door. Poirot could see it now. She had finally gathered everything. The letter, the evidence, the threat. After years of silence, after enduring Elise's lies and Alan's vanishing act, she had come to Beau Séjour not for reconciliation, but retribution. But Alan had come too, and her heart, worn and tired from decades of grief, had finally given in. No poison, no weapon, just a storm of emotion, of confrontation. Death by truth. Poirot turned away from the letter and called for Monsieur Lefebvre. Send word, he said quietly, to Alan Moreau, under his true name. Lefebvre swallowed hard. Where shall I send it? Everywhere, Poirot replied. He is already running. That evening, just as the fog returned like a cloak across the lake, Poirot found Elise Varenne alone in the drawing room, staring into the fireplace like it might show her what she refused to see. You lied, he said. No introduction. She didn't deny it. He was here, she whispered. Wasn't he? Poirot nodded. Under a false name. Room 10. Elise blinked, her hand trembling as she placed her glass down. I told him not to come. I begged him. Poirot raised a brow. You knew? Not until after. I recognized the code in the hallway. It was the one I bought him years ago. And still, you said nothing? She looked at him, the weariness in her eyes heavier than guilt. I loved him, even after everything. Poirot stepped forward. Celeste was going to expose him. She had the letter. She had made the call. Elise closed her eyes. He said she couldn't handle the truth, that she had always been fragile. Poirot's tone sharpened. That is not a defense. That is an alibi formed in cowardice. Elise said nothing. Poirot placed the half-burned letter on the table beside her. This is what she wrote. This is what he tried to destroy. And if he believes the fire could erase it, then he has underestimated both the flame and the woman he left behind. Elise reached for the letter with shaking fingers. She didn't cry. She simply stared, lips parted, as if reading it for the first time had finally broken the last thread, holding up her carefully constructed mask. Poirot turned toward the door. We are not yet done, he said. But we are close. And Madame Varenne, when the truth fully arrives, you must be ready to tell yours. Not the one you memorized, but the one you buried beside her. And, with that, he left the room as the fire behind her dimmed to an ember, flickering in rhythm with a truth that refused to stay buried. Chapter 5. The silence beneath the name. It was not thunder that woke the Hotel Beau Séjour that morning, nor the arrival of any storm, but the quiet click of a key sliding into the brass lock of room 6, the same room where Celeste Moreau's heartbeat had once stilled beneath the weight of 30 years of secrets. The hallway outside remained empty, save for the long stretch of carpet worn smooth by footsteps that knew how to lie. But inside, time held its breath, and Hercule Poirot stood not as a guest, not even as a detective, but as a witness to the final act of a story that had waited far too long for someone to listen. He had seen it unravel piece by piece. A brooch lost in dust, a name hidden beneath false identities, a letter half-burned but not silenced, and faces too polished to be honest. Yet it wasn't until Alain Moreau stood once again in this room, his shoulders hunched, his mouth dry, his voice as colorless as the gray light slipping through the window, that the truth finally began to speak without interruption. Alain did not resist. He did not demand a lawyer. He didn't ask how Poirot knew. Because when the truth circles a man long enough, it doesn't matter who delivers it, it arrives all the same. He stood by the fireplace, eyes never lifting, to meet Poirot's, his fingers tracing the edge of a photo frame he had once gifted Celeste in another lifetime. I came to stop her, he admitted, voice coarse, not from shouting, but from years of never saying what mattered. I thought if I could just talk to her, remind her of the good, that there was once love, that she didn't have to. His words broke. Poirot said nothing, his silence an invitation to speak deeper. But she was ready, Alain continued. She had the letter. She had already spoken to the lawyer. She said she'd waited long enough, that what I did to her, and to Elise, should never have been buried, that it was rotting her from the inside. And then she just stopped. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. You did not call for help. Alain flinched. No, I didn't. I checked. She was gone. I thought maybe this was mercy. For both of us. Poirot's voice was razor thin. But it wasn't mercy. It was convenience. Alain's jaw tightened. She made her choice to come here. I didn't kill her. Poirot stepped forward, every syllable now a blade. Monsieur Moreau, a man does not need to place his hands on a woman's throat to be her executioner. He only needs to hold her silence in his hands long enough for it to become fatal. Alain's mouth opened, but the words never came. Poirot retrieved the letter, what remained of it, from his coat. She named you, not just in ink, in motive, in memory. You came here knowing exactly what she intended to do. You didn't kill her heart, but you broke it. He placed the letter on the table, and when it stopped, You burned the only proof of your crimes, then slipped away behind a name that never belonged to you. Alan said nothing. He didn't cry, didn't collapse. He simply sat, folding into the chair by the fire like a man returning to a cell he had built himself long ago. Outside, the sound of a police car rolled to a stop near the front drive. Poirot turned to the window, watching officers step into the mist. They will ask for statements, for records, but they do not need a confession. You left that in the ashes. Alan looked up. What happens now? Poirot didn't answer. He simply opened the door, and that was all the justice the room required. That night, Poirot gathered what few guests remained in the lounge. The mood was not curious, it was reverent. No questions were asked, no names repeated, and yet every ear was poised, waiting for the conclusion of the tale that had haunted their stay. Poirot spoke quietly, not as a performer, but as a chronicler of grief. He explained that Madame Moreau had not been murdered in the traditional sense, but that her death was not natural either. It had been years in the making, a slow rot beneath a mask of civility. She died of a heart attack, he said, but it was not random. It was the last act of a heart that had been made to carry too much. Eyes shifted, heads bowed. The fire cracked once, loud against the silence. The man responsible, he continued, did not raise his hand against her, but he raised a silence around her so thick, so unforgiving, that it became its own kind of noose. And when she finally chose to speak, he did not stop her voice, but he ran from it. And so the room where she died, room 6, does not carry a ghost. It carries a truth that refused to die quietly. He paused, letting the words settle. And, for those of you who still hold secrets like broken glass in your pockets, beware, eventually, they cut their way out. The lounge emptied slowly. No one spoke. No one slept well that night. Elise Varenne left before dawn. She packed without help, paid in full, and vanished down the gravel drive in a taxi with fog for company. She would never see Alan again. She would never wear mourning clothes for Celeste. But somewhere deep inside her, something had shifted. A mirror cracked, a mask lowered, and for the first time in years, she wept for the woman who had loved the same man and paid for it in silence. Henri Duret stayed another week, said nothing, smoked alone by the garden each evening, always lighting a second cigarette and letting it burn out beside him. Poirot, for his part, returned to room 5. He sat beside the fire each night with his notes, but never opened them again. The case was closed, not in the way the police liked, but in the way Poirot always understood, when the lie ends and the silence becomes a name. And in the corner of room 6, the clock still ticked, 5 minutes slow. He did not fix it, because some things should remain just slightly off, a reminder that time itself bends beneath the weight of truth. And so, dear listener, if this story stirred something in you, if it made your breath slow or your mind linger on a name you haven't spoken in years, then let that be the legacy of Madame Moreau. Do not carry someone else's silence. Do not love someone who hands you their guilt disguised as devotion. And when the truth comes for you, do not run. Face it, like Celeste did, like justice always does. If you felt something while listening, if the story stayed in your chest long after the mystery ended, then don't let it be the last. Subscribe to this channel for more real, unsolved, and unforgettable mysteries told with care, silence, and smoke. Share this with someone who believes that the dead don't speak, but the rooms they leave behind always do.